Okay. Introduction. Today I'm going to discuss in general the following: the requirements for registration, technologist, technician, practical perspective of achieving the 11 outcomes for technicians and technologists, and then as a bonus, do's and don'ts when completing your application, attending your experience or professional interview. Next. Next slide. Okay, what is the difference between technologist and technician? Definition is stated in the EXA policy or document RO2, STA, PE, PT, PCE, PN. Competency standard for registration in professional categories as PE, PT, PCE, PN, revision 1, 20th August 2020, as described below. Technologist, it says broadly defined engineering problems require coherent and detailed engineering knowledge underpinning the applicable technology area. Technician, well-defined engineering problems are mainly solved by practical engineering knowledge underpinned by related theory. Next. Required competency standards for technician and technologist. Now, they've already shown this, so we can skip this quickly because it's just the group A and that, the knowledge base, so we can skip this slide. Next slide. Skip this slide. Next. Next slide. Okay, now we're coming here. What is the test required for well-defined engineering problem for technician? Test to be conducted for well-defined engineering problem is found in the EXA policy document RO2, STA, PE, PT, PCE, PN. Competency standard for registration in professional categories PE, PC, revision 1, 20 August 21 on page 15 under table 4, illustrating the test for a well-defined engineering problem. Next slide. Okay, this is what is there written in that document on that page. You can go through this on your own time if you've taken it down. It says, can the problem be solved? What is the nature of the problem? What is encountered in the solution process? What is involved in decision-making while solving the problem and evaluating the solution? There are your factors are there. You have to read those through. Okay, next one. Okay, practical perspective of 11 outcomes for technician. Outcome number 1. Outcome number 1, it states here, define, investigate, and analyze well-defined engineering problems encountered at your work. Here you have 3 keywords, and this you must remember. Define, what is your interpretation of your instruction? Do you understand what is required? Investigation, collect the required information you need to be able to do your design. And analyze the information you collected, how you use this information to get the required outcome as per instruction. And did you need to change that instruction? Was it different to what you originally had in your definition, defining the top there? Next. Outcome 2 is design and develop a solution to a well-defined engineering problems encountered in your work. Here you discuss the following under item 2.1. Solutions you developed, alternative solutions to the identified work. What checks did you conduct to determine the various impacts of the various solutions on your decision? Item 2.2 there. Here you state your reasons as to your choice of your final solution. Next slide. Okay, the practical perspective of 11 outcomes. Outcome 3. Comprehend and apply your knowledge in establishing engineering practices and knowledge specific within your area of practice as applied in your task. Outcome 3.1. Here you state how you applied your understanding of the National Diploma Advanced Certificate Engineering Practical or Diploma Engineering or Diploma Engineering Technician theory for your solution. There you must understand and tell what formulas, what understanding, what techniques, and what you would done and use to get your solution. Item 3.2. Here you submit your calculations and the reasons to be applied to the applied theory you stated under item 3.1 as to why you considered it as correct. Next slide. Outcome 4. Manage part of all of one or more well-defined engineering activities embodied in your work. Item 4.1. There is a two-part in this item. How do you manage yourself? Next part, how do you manage priorities, processes, resources in doing your work? Here you discuss briefly the tools you use to do project management in your project. Like if you're using a diary to manage yourself, managing priorities, your to-do list, processes, and the resources, use a Gantt chart or your bar chart. Item 4.2, what was your responsibility in the project team and how did you interact in the team? You did not do the work on your own. You worked with different disciplines. So you have to understand that and explain that to us. Next. Next slide. Outcome 5, communicate clearly with others in the course of your engineering activity. It's a well-defined engineering work. 5.1, under this item, you discuss your communication skill in presentation. What is the medium you used for the work to be done? Did you do it by hard copies or did you do it by either what we're doing now with what you call it, PowerPoint or other means? Here you must also discuss how you wrote a report for the work you completed. Item 5.2, discuss how to give an instruction to the people working with you, like your colleagues and the contractors or whoever that is working with you. Next slide. Outcome 6, recognize the reasonable, foreseeable social, cultural, and environmental effects of your well-defined engineering activity or task. 6.1. Here you discuss the impact of your engineering activity in relation to social. Here you identify the social impact like improvement of living conditions, job creation, and other items there. Cultural, here you discuss the cultural impact of your engineering activity may have like religious beliefs, that will have an effect on your engineering activity. Item 6.2, here you discuss the effects of your engineering activity and who did you engage to discuss with, for instance, local community structures or business forums. Next slide. Outcome 7, meet all legal and regulatory requirements and protect health and safety of persons in the course of your well-defined engineering activity task. 7.1. Here you list all the legal and regulatory requirements applicable for your engineering activity. When you do a design or site work, look for the required legal and regulatory requirements. For instance, the OSH Act, the VULA Act, the Water Act. All these have effect that you must know about. Discuss briefly what you did to ensure safety and health issues being addressed. So that is your safety file. How did you go about it to ensure that it was right? Item 7.2. Here you discuss the risk management you sought advice on and how you applied the risk management system. So you go to somebody who does a risk management and you look and see what they're doing and see what level it is, the matrix of your risk management. Next slide. Outcome 8, conduct engineering activities ethically in executing your work. 8.1. Here you state all ethical issues you encounter in your work situation. Who were the parties involved and how did you resolve the issue? Examples like bribery, over-designing, over-measurement, over-claiming. That is engineering in the context of engineering activity, of a well-defined engineering activity. Item 8.2, here you confirm with a yes or no, and please read the EXA code of conduct for a registered person. Many people forget that, and when you get asked about it, they don't know what is going on there. Next slide. Outcome 9. exercise sound judgment in the course of well-defined engineering activities encountered in your work. Remember, this section has relevance to what you have stated in outcomes 1 and 2. This is where you use your engineering judgment, taking into account the factors you used in outcomes 1 and 2, how you applied the interaction between the factors taken into account. Next slide. Okay, item 9.1. It's still outcome 9. You need to break this down to the keywords. What is the interrelationship of the applicable factors? How did you apply the identified factors? Item 9.2. Yeah, you made an engineering judgment call even when not all the evidence was available for your design. Next one. Okay. Outcome 10. Be responsible for making decisions on part or all of well-defined engineering activities, including in your work. Remember, the section, as I said above, has relevance to what you have stated in outcome 1 and 2. Now, outcome 10.1. Here you discuss your theoretical calculations you used that influenced your decision to do your engineering work. 10.2. From where? From who did you seek advice from outside of your education and experience? Who did you go to? Where did you get the information? How did it influence your decision? Next one. Okay, 10.3. Discuss how you took ownership of your own work. Discuss the shortcomings of your output when you evaluated your work. Where you see you had some problems, how did you go about it? And you took ownership of your design. You took ownership of your decision that you made. Next slide. Okay, outcome 11. Undertake professional development activities sufficient to maintain and extend your competence. Under this outcome, you discuss you and your employer's philosophy in regards to professional development. Remember, you must have knowledge about the continuous professional development requirements. So basically, professional development is nothing stands still. Technologies change. We get new technologies. How do you go about to ensure that you stay ahead with the new technologies that are in your field of competency? Okay, next slide. Okay, now we're going to go to technologists. We finished the 11 outcomes for technicians. Now we're going for technologists. Now, what is required for a broadly defined engineering problem technologist? It is also the same document, the RO2 STA PE PT PCE, competency standard for registration in professional categories. But on page 13 under table 3, that is where the questions you have to ask yourself if you're on the level of a technologist. Next slide. You will see the steps are different. They are more different to compare what is required for a technician. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through all of it. Okay, we're going to go to outcome 1. Define, investigate, and analyze broadly defined engineering problem encountered at your work. Define, it's under item 1.1. Is the problem identifying a broadly defined engineering problem? That's a question you have to ask, and you have to go back to that table to make sure that it is there. Now, investigate. How did you go about collecting, organizing, and evaluating the information you collected for the identified broadly defined engineering problem? So it's the information you collect to do your design, to solve your problem. How did you go about it? Now analyze. How did you interpret this information you collected and the assumptions that were taken to derive a solution? This is not your final design. This is what you used to make an assumption and to analyze your information that you collected. Next slide. Now, in simple terms, it means what was the problem? How did you collect the information? And using this information with the certain engineering assumptions to achieve the solution or solutions. Next slide. Outcome 2, design or develop a solution to broadly defined engineering. Now you design or develop is item 2.1. Here you discuss your design or development of your solution based on the problems identified, information collected, and assumptions made in outcome 1. So solution 2.2, item 2.2. Here you discuss what designs or solutions you used to solve the identified broadly defined engineering activity. Please note, designs or solutions are in plural. So you don't just discuss one, you discuss maybe 2, 3. Next slide. After you have identified the different solutions, state which was the best solution to be used and why did you opt to that solution. It could be due to design life, it could be due to financial, or it could be due to some engineering judgment that you used. You have to tell us why you used that solution, why you didn't use the others. Now, specifications 2.3. Discuss what detailed specifications you drew up and design documentation to the satisfaction of the employer and client. So this is where you discuss your tender document if you're working, the specifications, the project specifications you wrote in there, or your specifications or your notes that you wrote onto the side of your design drawing. This is where you discuss that. Next slide. Okay, outcome number 3. Comprehend and apply the knowledge embodied in widely accepted and applied engineering procedures and processes, systems or methodology, and those specific to the jurisdiction in which you practice. Now, in this outcome, you demonstrate your ability in planning, investigation, and operations in the area of your competency. Now, 3.1 is your technical knowledge. Is your technical knowledge identified in the field of practice applicable and well established, irrespective of your location? Now, working knowledge. There's a difference. Now, the technical knowledge is what you used, your experience, and your BTech subjects that you have used to do there. Now, your working knowledge. Does your working knowledge of your field of practice interact with other disciplines? Now, that means engineering and others. A good example is to get the rocket to the moon. How many different disciplines interacted with each other? Next slide. Now, your financial jurisdictional knowledge, safety, and management. What is your knowledge, which includes financial, legal, and regulatory requirements relevant to local codes of practice, safety, and management? The knowledge you discuss here is the relevant technical, working, financial, jurisdictional, safety, and management knowledge that you are applicable for your field of practice. Not all fields of practice will have the same. So here you discuss what you have is applicable in your field of practice. Next slide. Outcome 4, manage part or all of one or more broadly defined engineering activities. Here you discuss your management skills for a broadly defined engineering activity. 4.1, how do you manage yourself, people, work priorities, and processes of a broadly defined engineering activity? What tools do you use to manage yourself, people, work, and priorities and processes? Now, is it evidence provided for planning, organizing, leading, and ability to control the broadly defined engineering activity? This is a question you have to ask when you're doing 4.2. Now, item 4.3, how do you establish and maintain a professional and business relationship with your clients, contractors, and consultants? What tools are you using? What contracts are you using? How do you control that? And what are you doing to be able to do that? Next slide. In a nutshell, for this outcome, how do you actually manage, plan, and maintain professional and business relationships during an identified, broadly defined engineering activity? That's what you have to discuss in outcome 4. Next slide. Outcome 5, communicate clearly with others in the course of your engineering activities. Now, here you demonstrate your communication skills. How do you write a technical report that is concise, effectively, legally, and editorially correct? That's 5.1. 5.2, how do you give a clear instruction to various stakeholders, and what formats do you use? This is usually your site instructions that you give, or instructions to your subordinates that are working under you, or as an instruction to a client that you clearly need information. How do you go about that? What mediums do you use? Next slide. Okay. How do you do presentations, and what appropriate formats do you use for your audience when presenting a broadly defined engineering activity? This is where you do a presentation, what mediums you're using, what happens you do if you have a power failure, as what we do now. How do you go about it? Now, in summary, how do you communicate with others, and what platforms and styles do you use for your communications for a broadly defined engineering activity? That is a question you have to ask yourself when you're doing outcome 5. Next slide. Outcome 6, recognize and address the reasonably foreseeable social, cultural, and environmental effects of broadly defined engineering activities. Now, who are the interested and affected parties, and what are their expectations in the relationship to the interactions with? Your technical considerations, that's where you do your design, you take into consideration. Social considerations is how are you going to do job creations, and what structures are you going to use to talk to the community. Cultural considerations, that's where you got to maybe grave sites, nearing grave areas, heritage areas, and that you have to take into consideration. Environmental considerations, what effect will your design, what you're doing, have on the environment? If it's a road and it goes through a wetland, are you allowed to do that? That you have to find out. Next slide. Now you have to also take the long-term sustainability considerations, for instance, like the maintenance of a water network or of the road, of the stormwater. These you take into consideration, labor and job creations. All right. What measures did you take to reduce negative effect of your engineering activity under item 6.2? We do get negative effects to the environment on the engineering activity. How did you limit it? What did you take to limit that? Now, note, all these considerations are under the evaluation and planning tasks of your area of competency for a broadly defined engineering activity. You must be able to supply evidence for outcome 6. Next slide. In summary, for outcome 6, the outcome 6 is where you plan and evaluate and broadly define engineering activity and take into the consideration of the effect of the technical, social, cultural, environmental, and long-term sustainability effects it has on the area where your design is being done. Also in outcome 6, the negative environmental effect of the broadly defined engineering activity to be identified and what was done to minimize this effect on the environment. Okay, next slide. Outcome 7, meet all legal and regulatory requirements and protect and safety of persons in the course of his or her broadly defined engineering activity. Now, what are the legal requirements for the applicable engineering activity under 7.1? You must also be able to name them. What are the regulatory requirements of the applicable engineering activity? There you have to discuss that, also name them. And when you're asked for any of these legal and regulatory requirements, you must be able to explain in a short sentence what is their purpose. What are the health and safety requirements for the applicable engineering activity? And what standards are required for broadly defined engineering activity? This is all to do with the regulatory and requirements and the protection of people on the site and that. And make sure that you understand what is required. Next slide. What circumstances did you assist or demonstrate a selection of sustainable material that was a saving? It's, for instance, if you take a design and you can see you can change your pipe design to a cheaper pipe with the same standard without having any effect to your design, you can do that. And you tell us why you did it and what was your reasoning. Then, what risks did you identify and how did you apply the risk management strategies to minimize the risk? Here is talking about risk management. What did you do and what metrics did you use when you identified certain risks? And you must be able to tell us what is the level of the risks. To summarize outcome number 7, it is the legal and the regulatory requirements with the risks identified and what measures were taken to minimize these risks. And that is basically, can we go to slide 8? The next slide, sorry. Okay, outcome 8, conduct engineering activity ethically. And here you confirm of Exos Code of Conduct. But you must understand what is required for ethical behavior under Exos Code of Conduct. You must also be able to apply professional ethics, understand the application of responsibilities and norms of engineering practice within your own limits of competency. So you discuss that of where you've got a situation and how did you solve it. Please take note, you must read Exos Code of Conduct for a registered person. And this is the same what I said previously. Next. The summary of outcome number 8, you confirm you understand and have read the Exos Code of Conduct for registered persons and understand the ethical issues under this code. Okay, you can go next slide. Outcome 9, exercise sound judgment in the course of broadly defined engineering activities. As what I said previously, and my colleague said previously in the previous presentation, 9 and 10 is coupled to outcome 1, 2, and 3. Here you must exercise judgment in arriving at a conclusion within your application of technologies, and you must also indicate their interrelationship with other disciplines and technologies. So if you're doing civil, did you work with electrical or did you work with mechanical guys, and what was the interrelationship with them? You need to consider the risks and consequences of the applied technology and how does it affect the parties involved. Here you discuss your applied technology and if there is anything and what effect does it have on the parties. In summary, you need to indicate how you derived at your decision in the design using sound engineering judgment at the level of a broadly defined activity. So you are taking your judgment. You're doing engineering judgment on your designs. Remember that. Next slide. Now, outcome 10, to be responsible for making decisions on part or all of broadly defined engineering activities. Here you discuss the considerations you took into forming your decision in engineering social, environmental, sustainability, development in discharging your responsibility for parts of one or more activities. Now, here you remember you had to do engineering, social, and environmental and sustainable development. Here you discuss it just further, and you tell us there what it is into relationship with outcome 1, 2, and 3. You must indicate advice you sought from a responsible authority on matters out of your field of competency. Usually this can be a government or a specialist where you do not be able to do it, but you want to get more information to help you with your design. You must demonstrate the use of academic knowledge at the level of BTech combined with your past experience when formulating your decision. Now, next slide. Now, in summary, you must be able to demonstrate taking responsibility for your decisions of a broadly defined engineering activity. So here you take responsibility for your design or for your decisions you've made at the level of broadly defined engineering activity. But please note, I've said this before, outcomes 9 and 10 are directly linked to outcomes 1, 2, and 3. Next slide. Now, outcome 11, undertake professional development activities sufficient to maintain and extend his or her competency. Under item 9.1, you discuss what you have done independently to ensure you have professionally kept up to date with new developments in your field of engineering practice. Now, outcome 9.2, you discuss what you believe in regard to your professional development, how you go about it, what do you believe in, what did you think you're going to do in the future, and that. Also, in summary, you must be able to discuss how you ensured your professional development in the past and also in the future. Now, also, please note, ensure you have read EXA's continuous professional development policy and understand what is there. You will most probably get questions asked about that. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to come to one of the items that we get quite regularly when I'm doing assessments, the do's and don'ts. I'm going to briefly discuss some do's and don'ts that you can take note of. Completing your applications. Do's. Prepare your application as per supplied format. Do not change the format. Check your application for spelling and grammar errors. Read your application several times to ensure it conveys what you are indicating. Clearly indicate your responsibilities in projects you have named in your application. Now we're just going back to read your application several times to ensure it conveys what you are indicating clearly. A lot of people don't do that. Take it, read it, go away and come back and read it and see if it's giving you what you want to say. Next slide. Fully understand what is required from each form and also for each outcome. Preferably choose one project for outcomes 1, 2, 3. I forgot to put something in there, but read the EXA policy documents for your specific registration category. That is RO2, RO8, RO3, and then your guidelines for your registration document. Don'ts. Don't rush through your application form. Don't use words like etc., see attachments, and general statements. Don't use technical terms that you do not understand. Next slide. Now, attending an interview. Do's. Prepare your presentation and limit it to 15 minutes that is allowed in the professional review. Know your work, projects in your report and presentation. When speaking about projects, state yourself as I and not we. What I usually tell the applicants is it's me, myself, and I. Remember that. Do not know your subject being asked. If you do not know a subject being asked about, say you do not know. Do not try and say, yes, I know, and then you don't. Just say, it's not my scope of work, or I do not know. Be honest. Know how to set up your presentation via the social platform used by EXA. We do get a lot of the guys coming in, applicants coming in, and they do not know how to set up the platform. Practice at the house. Practice makes perfect. Next slide. Practice on your own and before colleagues your presentation. That does help. And don't in your interview. Be overconfident in your interview. Use general terms during the interview. Do not use layman terms when answering a question posed by the interviewer. Do not preempt questions during the interview. Do not fiddle with the camera during the interview. Next slide. Do not argue with the interviewers if you feel the question was unfair, and just state that you feel the question was unfair after the interview when afforded the opportunity, not during the interview. Do not ask the interviewers if you were successful at the end of the interview. I can tell you one thing, we will not tell you. Next slide. Okay, in conclusion, I've discussed practical perspectives required for the 11 outcomes for engineering report, Form C 2.3 ER for the technician and technologist. I've also discussed the do's and don'ts when completing your application and during the interview. Next slide. Acknowledgement. The presentation is based on the Engineering Council of South Africa, EXA's documents, policy documents, RO2, application form for registration as professional engineering technician, application form for registration as professional engineering technologist. And next slide. Now I've come to the end of the presentation, and thank you all for attending. So any questions, they will allow you. Thank you.